fantastic. I'm just going to start. All right. So the first project is going to be my project, and this is my first time going to be presenting at Kai, so very excited. Hi, my name is Leping. I'm currently a master's student who's going to transition into a PhD student here at DGP. Today I'll present MaRginalia, which is enabling in-person lecture capturing and note-taking through mixed reality. So this is created with my wonderful collaborators, Erin, Sangho, Ludwig, and Tovi. And Ludwig is actually sitting right here, just waiting to us. Okay. Yeah, so when you walk into a university classroom, you'll probably see something like this. University students are increasingly taking digital notes. However, digital note-taking can also be distracting. When students look away for some second during the lecture, they could be easily lost, just like showing in this meme. Therefore, the goal of this project is to better support digital note-taking. Specifically, the university students' digital in-person lecture note-taking through mixed reality, with the goal to really help students keep paying attention to the lecture and take notes without needing to look down at their devices. So we first conducted a formative study to understand students' digital note-taking practices and challenges. We surveyed 45 students from our university with a diverse background about their digital note-taking frequency, the frequency of using different note-taking tools, their perception of usefulness of their different tools that they're using, and the free-form field so that they can answer their existing challenges. Next, we invited 12 participants to a follow-up interview where we ask about their note-taking behavior, their challenges, and also some of their coping strategies. So overall, the high-level takeaway is that we found that students' digital note-taking practice involved taking handwritten notes, annotate on slides, taking pictures, recording audios. And we also identified 3 main challenges. So first, students miss out content while writing. So they say that the professor might be going too fast, so that I couldn't keep up. So second, we found that it is cumbersome and distracting to add pictures to their notes. So one participant saying that take a picture and then they have to airdrop it, copy it into their notes, and that takes some time. And third, it's difficult to navigate audio recordings. So they say during the time of review, I will not have enough time to just listen and to the audio again. Okay, so from the formative study, we derived 3 design goals. First, we want to support existing digital note-taking practices that we found. Second, we want to minimize the friction in capturing and organizing the lecture content so that's easier for later reviews. And third, we want to enhance students' engagement and support quick catch-up so that if they miss information, they can go and review something very quickly. So our system is based on the potential of using mixed reality, hand-mounted display for information work. For example, prior work has leveraged the camera on an AR glasses to record videos and provide some context into notes. There are also work exploring displaying information that is seamlessly blended with the physical environment for paper reading, and also just supporting note-taking and VR lectures. So with that, we present MaRginalia, an integrated note-taking system for in-person lectures. With our system, the user can take handwritten notes on the tablet, like they usually does. They can also take notes with mixed reality so that they can see the lecture and stay engaged. And during the lecture, MaRginalia will automatically create snapshots of the slides and transcribe the instructor's words so that the user can quickly capture and annotate on all of these transcripts and slides. And the content is seamlessly added to their notes. If they ever miss anything, they can quickly review the lecture history from the mixed reality interface. And in order to interact with the system, we introduced the Skates plus Penn interaction that operates very similar to a graphic tablet. So a gaze is quick and moves across the mixed reality interface so that the user can use it as an initial cursor position. Whereas the hands are stable and precise, and it's used for adjusting the cursor, clicking buttons, and doing the handwriting. So let's follow a user and see how MaRginalia works in action. On the left, this is what the user is seeing through the mixed reality camera. On the right, it's a side view showing what the user's actions are and what they're doing on the tablet. Okay, So you might notice that this is this room and that is me. So the user can take handwritten notes on the tablet, and he can switch between the pen, the highlighter, the eraser, all these tools. And when he looks up, you'll see MaRginalia spatial panels that are anchored in the lecture. So during the lecture, MaRginalia automatically creates these snapshots of the slides and transcripts. And the user, when the user sees something important, he can directly annotate the slides with the pen or the highlighter tool. And the user can also annotate the transcripts. So they can annotate the slides, the transcripts, and all of those things are seamlessly added to their notes. And the user can also click and just go through the notes by the things that they have annotated, captured, and added to their notes. And in addition to annotating content, the user can also capture the slide entirely by just doing a squeeze gesture on the pen. The slide would be automatically added to their notes, and the user can capture the transcripts with the same gesture. The user can also take notes in mixed reality or on the tablet so that they can associate all of the captures together to form a more personal note. And if the user ever misses anything, they can select the previous slide to catch up and see their annotation. They can also click on the scroll button to catch up with whatever the instructor is saying previously. And when the user looks forward while they're taking notes, they'll notice if the speaker has been moving on to the next point and just click the live button so that they can quickly catch up. Okay, so we really want to understand the system's usability and usefulness. So we conducted an exploratory study with another 12 participants. They were tasked to take notes with our system in a simulated in-person lecture environment shown on the right. The lecture slides are played through a large display, and the lecture is showing on the secondary screen. This is to ensure that it's consistent between the participants. And upon completing the lecture note-taking task, they were asked to complete some questionnaires and semi-structured interviews. So the high-level takeaway, MaRginalia received positive feedback on its usability. The system achieved a good adjective rating on the usability scale, with the participants saying that it feels intuitive, or that it's very easy to use and easy to understand. By analyzing all of the notes that are taken by the participants, we also found that MaRginalia supports a very diverse workflow. So for example, in addition to taking handwritten notes, one of the participants also annotate on the image or draw a star to signal the importance of a quote or to provide some definitions of a key term. In addition, there are also other participants who are highlighting words like you expect and using a dot just to dot on the capture so that they can quickly add whatever the instructor is saying to their notes. So overall, MaRginalia was found to be helpful when it comes to helping students stay engaged. Most participants spend most of the time heads up and focusing on the lecture. They commented that you're always seeing the slides and information, or that they don't have to rewrite whatever the instructor is saying, the lecturer in this case. And that they can easily go back to the start and add more detail to some of my notes while being able to see when the lecturer has moved on to the next important topic. You might have noticed there are two outliers. There are also people who are not spending a lot of time looking for it. And so the two participants said that they're taking more time, spending more time on taking their notes on the tablet because they're familiar with that. So they say that when they look down, it's just how they normally take notes, or that if I get more used to the interaction technique, I will probably not look down as much because I feel like looking down on the tablet does risk missing out on this thing. Okay, so in conclusion, we introduced MaRginalia. It's a mixed reality note-taking system for in-person lectures. And through a user study, we showed that MaRginalia can effectively support note-taking during in-person lectures. And here are some exciting future works. So one is to conduct some deployment study to understand what are the learning benefits of a mixed reality note-taking system. What does it mean for students to be able to collect information very easily? And how does that, all these notes help them review and form a concrete understanding on the concepts later on? The system also raises questions about the classroom dynamic and what the instructor's experience are when the learning is mediated through a display between them. And even though MaRginalia is built for in-person lectures, it can also be taken to different contexts. For example, conference talk, like we're doing right now. And it can also be extended to support note-taking during meetings where there are multiple speakers and so on. And last but not least, to support all of these real-world environments that the system has to operate in, we also need to develop some sort of adaptive technique so that the placement of the UIs are accommodating to whatever environment that people are using. Okay, so with that, I want to say thank you, and please refer to our paper for more details, and I'm happy to take any questions. So we're going to do this with a 10-minute talk, which is required by the CHI organizing committee, and then we're going to do a 5-minute Q&A. So now, if anyone has any questions or anything that they want to ask for details about, now's the time. Yes.
First of all, I love the technology and the applications you have. If I had this when I was doing school, I used the tablet, like an iPad and the Apple Pencil. But this just, I just wanted to ask, one thing is, why did you use only like a small sample set, like 12 students? And my other question is, have you looked into anything like what would be potential for fatigue during like an entire week of, like 8 hours a day lectures, just wearing a device, both eyesight as well as like having something on your head. Have you gotten any feedback regarding that, or?
Yeah. Those are great questions. So the first question basically is saying that why didn't we have more people? I think we're definitely that's part of the future work. That's where we're trying to explore and see the unknown and present something and explore that. And to your second question, definitely all of the existing form factors, like if any of you have tried Vision Pro, it's hard to wear for more than an hour. It's really heavy, and we believe that in the future, obviously, technology is going to be miniaturized. But of course, yes, there's going to be fatigue and display if it's always on. I think that's a valid concern, and I think it really helps to what benefit people are and trade-offs that they have in the future.
Thank you.
I had 2 questions. I think I have 3. One were the interviewees a subset of the larger survey group?
No.
Or different?
Yeah.
Okay. And the heads-up display. Sorry, I'm old school. The mixed reality HMD. I mean, how accepted is there a stigma around wearing that in class, or have you had students wearing them showing up?
I'm imagining that the teacher cannot see the eyes of the students.
Yeah, I mean,
technology.
Absolutely, because as
an instructor, that would be really frightening.
Absolutely, because people during COVID has the experience of just staring into the void, right? I talked with some teachers, basically said that COVID was awful because they couldn't see anything from whatever the students are paying attention or not, just because everything is mediated through Zoom. And I can imagine this might be of a similar effect, but also maybe it's not just in the classroom setting, it might find uses in other contexts, like for example, meetings.
I haven't spent quality time with the Apple's product, but I have done a demo, and I was fascinated to see that they actually have the eye, that eye contact attempt, which is fascinating. Third question was, I've noticed that the parsing of the transcript is interesting. Is that just totally automated? Because I would have thought maybe you would want a complete sentence or semantic chunk,
yes,
rather than just parsed it in the middle of a sentence. And so I'm curious if that could be improved upon or considered.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're doing right here is actually very stupid and very primitive. That's how I did it. Basically, we're just trying to explore what people might be using this for. And definitely in the future, we can explore better ways with all of the LLMs and so on to just take information in a way that is segmented semantically. So that's really better fitted to whatever they're taking notes on, and they don't really need to worry about that part.
Yeah, I think it would
Yeah,
reduce
that would be awesome,
cognitive
yeah.
load.
Absolutely.
Enhance, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I think we can take one last question, and then we can bring everything offline and move to the next speaker. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. One thing I was thinking about was, I've heard before that when you're learning something, writing it down is more helpful for knowledge retention. I'm just curious, is that something that you've explored in terms of how much of people remembering what they use or listen to?
Yeah, I think that's also a great question. I think it goes back to the first question as well. It's definitely like what kind of learning effect is going to be getting out of this. Obviously, you want it to be having some learning effect. And personally, I think this is more of a tool so that it can reduce friction. But obviously, there's this balance between like what kind of friction that you do want to keep so that it keeps all the memory forming and helps and conducive to learning. So I think it's going to be a balance and trade-off between like how do you design the system very cleverly. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next speaker, which is going to be Zixin Nicole. So Zixin is a PhD student here at DGP, and with that,
well, hello, my name is Zixin Zhao, and slide this in. So, hi, my name is Zixin Zhao, and I'll be presenting Making the Right Connections, linking the writing support tools with writers' needs. And I'm a second-year PhD student here at DGP, and I'm co-supervised by Gerald Penn, who works at the Computational Linguistics Department, Computational Linguistics Lab, and Fanny Chevalier here with DGP. And this work was done together with them, and Damien, Masson, and Sangho came our collaborator over at Neighbor. And oh my God, I disappeared. Okay. I will need to fix this. And we're presenting it at KAI 2025. All right. So if you look up the word AI and writing on the ACM Digital Library, you get over 900 matches just from the KAI 2024 proceedings alone. So it comes to no surprise that there's been actually multiple papers going over and doing surveys on writing tools and forming. Here. Sorry.
it's really the biggest UX count.
I'll move this over here, and I think that's fine. Okay. Okay. I was pressing and nothing was showing up. So here, if you look up AI and writing on the ACM Digital Library, you get over 900 results. That's from last year's KAI proceedings. So there's been a lot of writing tools surveys being done, one on digital writing tools for academic writing, other ones just creating a design space for writing tools, and another one for creating a design space of intelligent and interactive writing assistants, and this recent one that also came out in 2024 on the taxonomy of cognitive contributions of writing tools within intelligent agents. So, but in parallel, commercial tools for writing have also been steadily increasing. With the initial word processor dating back to almost 40 years ago, applications like Notion, Obsidian have introduced a more non-linear workflow into people's writing process. And there's also been numerous AI co-writing systems that are being seemingly introduced every single day. And these text interfaces have evolved a lot, and the way that we write have evolved alongside it. So with ACI researchers, we're often on the lookout for something new. So when a new paper comes out with a funky new idea, our attention is immediately drawn to it, and we praise it for how novel it is and how great it is, how fun it is. So over time, when these prototypes become part of surveys like the ones I mentioned, it does help guide future research, but we often forget to look beyond the research sphere and to see what commercial tools are doing. And without looking at commercial tools, it's hard to see what writers are actually doing, and because what we see is what researchers think writers are doing. So there's a slight disconnect here. And what we like to do with our work is to bring attention to the writer's current practices and bring it within the context of the commercial tools that they use and compare that with the literature. So we want to bring attention to their current practices. So in our work, we'd like to highlight some of these misalignments between the tools developed by research and tools used by writers. We also want to show how this disconnect has led to some unmet needs, and how with the research focus on solving specific problems, it does come at the cost of designing for only a small compartment of the writing process. And it makes it hard to see the full holistic view of writing. So in our work, we specifically focus on creative writing, but this can be branched out, and we hope that it might spur other people to look into different types of writing processes. To do this, we triangulated between 3 different data sources: past literature to see what tools research has focused on, and that allows us to give an overview of the research space. Then we ran an online questionnaire with writers, and we looked at discussions on Reddit, on an r/writing subreddit, and we used that to find out what kind of tools writers are currently using within their own practices. I'm sorry, I completely jumped ahead of myself. This is bad practice. So before looking at literature and empirical research, we looked at theoretical models of creativity in writing. And there's different models for the creative process and for the writing process. And what we did is we worked to align these models together and define components of the creative writing process and use it to structure our analysis. And through this lens, we analyzed our different data sources. And we found that there were 3 main recurring themes that categorize the tools from each of the writing components. There's tools that help with creativity, there's tools that help with recollecting information, and there's tools that help you organize information on your writing. And for a little while, I'll talk about our findings in pre-writing. And what's interesting is that pre-writing is actually very understudied in research because it's not very well defined. So using the 3 themes that we covered before, we found that there's many different activities that writers use some kind of tools to support their workflow. So for example, for creativity during pre-writing, there's these. Writers value and leverage community practice, but from the icons here, you can see that there's not too much research that's seen in this space. And that's similar for recollection and organization. We don't really have time to cover each individual one in detail. If you want to see it in more detail, you can read the paper, but I'll go over just one. So capturing the spark. So let's jump right in. So within the data on Reddit in our questionnaire, writers often mentioned needing something quick and easy to access tools, and even sometimes using like a crumpled receipt to jot down their ideas. But within research, we actually found that there's not a lot of prior works at all on tools that can help creative writing or for capturing their spark. And there's some works within academic writing like Rambler, which supports on-the-go voice notes, which could be inspiration for future work in this area. So as a summary, overall, there's not a lot of work on activities surrounding pre-writing, and there's a real gap for researchers that could be filled here. So what we suggest is that could mean a little bit more work on tools to help unguided exploration, tools that help search for resources, tools that help capture inspirations, and tools that help organize and reflect on those inspirations. So moving on to the next step, which is planning. Planning activities involve a usual goal-oriented task. This could involve ideating with tools, and there's actually been quite a lot of very interesting work using AI to help with ideation recently. And there's other activities like visualizing and organizing elements that could also fall into this component. For this presentation, we'll dive into one of them, which is visualizing elements. This is partially because I'm supervised by someone who focused on visualization. So for visualizing components, writers will often manually create their own visual aids because available tools don't actually offer them a diverse set of visualization methods to kind of bring physical manifestations of their ideas. And in our questionnaire that we ran, we gathered some examples from writers to see what they've created for their past works. So that's what you see here. And we've organized them based on the amount of details and based on the amount of text that's being shown. So here, some visual aids are used for high-level concepts. So that means stories like overviews of the maps of the stories, or writing out the themes, or creating some kind of plot grid. Others like to focus on very granular details of their stories, like notes for each chapter, mood boards for the chapters, sticky notes, and little lists of to-do items. And then let's go back and look through in the horizontal axis. So this is separated based on the amount of text that are in each visualization. There's some writers that like to stick to mainly using visuals, and there's some writers who like to use a lot of text in their visuals, which kind of contradict, but the placement of it is important. So even though there's so much variety in the types of visual aids people create for their own work, we found that there's actually very little work in visualizations that help out with creating these. And there's not a lot of literature on this at all. So what could we do? Well, we could look to build more tools that incorporate AI to support ideation and augment the writer's creativity, or we could look into AI to guide writers during the planning process, or we could shift around and, like we've shown, look at works that can help you visualize elements of the writing, or help people organize and reflect on the writing elements. So moving on, there's a lot of existing works on writing support tools on specifically generating. You've all seen this at Kai, you've seen this in other conferences. People love AI co-writing now. But even with all that research interest, there's actually a large amount of it has been focused on writing, supporting creativity while writing. So specifically on supporting people writing alongside the AI. And that makes the other aspects like nonlinear writing and writing environments to be kind of overshadowed. So overall, there hasn't been a lot of literature supporting tasks outside of thinking writing with AI. So we propose that maybe there could be a shift towards something else instead. And that could mean tools that help us with nonlinear writing practices, or tools that explore different types of workflows. So on to the next, revising and editing text. With revision, some of the prior works have already pointed out that more work could be redirected towards revising text. And from the writers in our questionnaire, they also agree with this, because oftentimes what writers actually need help with is the revision of their work. And with respect to that, we found that writers will often need to do a lot of things to help out with their revising, like editing with others, which we'll go into more detail later on, or you can ask me about it. Alternate views and editing with machines, and helping out with structural revision. So even though there's been an increase in the attention given to revision while writing, it still needs to be diversified, because a lot of the work that's been looking at revision has been with revising with a machine, but the machine doesn't provide detailed enough or personalized enough feedback for people to actually be able to act on them or find that it's quite useful. So overall, that could mean that tools could help out with more collaborative revision, seeing the text alternatively using a different medium, or facilitate more structural revision to edit the theme of the paper or any issues with the organizational elements of the story. So moving on to the component that wraps everything up together. But as I've said at the very beginning, segmenting the writing process comes at the cost of viewing the writing practice as fragmented little pieces. But in reality, when you're writing, you're kind of trying to monitor your process throughout. You're doing revision as you're writing. You're doing revision as you're planning. So all these steps all come together. There's actually very little amount of work that look at reminders that people put on the side of their writing, or support for entire projects. So just to reiterate, there could be more tools that help out with peripheral reminders and tools that help manage larger projects. So here I've kind of gone over each component and how all of them are equally important and combined together to form the writing process. And without seeing the whole picture, it's easy to ignore the lesser components. And with research usually focused on innovation, it can be hard not to overly modularize the aspects of writing while trying to find the gap that your work can fill. But we need to remember that we're only looking at a component within a process that's much larger. Finally, with this space becoming much more popular, we need to think about the purpose of the tools that we create. Is it to help writers become more productive? Or is it to help improve the quality of the text that writers create? Or is it to make writing more accessible and for more people to become writers? So thank you. And right now the website link is broken. No, the website link is not broken, but the paper link is broken. So please don't scan for the paper link. And if you have any questions, I invite them.
Nice transitions. I really like the animations.
Thank you.
My question is more about like the coding of the qualitative data. So do you treat like the questionnaire and metadata as kind of like, I guess like coding? Do you treat them differently? Did you find different information from those sources?
Yeah, we did actually find some different information from the two codes. What we did first was we coded the amount of whichever one had less data. In this case, it was the questionnaire. It had much less text compared to the Reddit data. So we kind of used the questionnaire data to formulate some kind of thematic codes that we could put the Reddit data with, and to find keywords that we could identify within the Reddit data. Because a big issue with the Reddit data is that because we looked at data over the span of 10 years, there's quite a lot of discussions that happened during that time. I'll scroll back to one of the slides that kind of shows this. But if you can see here, there's, this one doesn't show it too well. Yes, they'll be fine. So with each of these, I kind of tagged the points that I make here with a symbol for Reddit and a symbol for the questionnaire. So there's some points that are only tagged with one of them, and that's mainly within the pre-writing data. So here there's only Reddit data on this. And that is because for our questionnaire, we didn't expect to get so much insight about pre-writing from Reddit. When we kind of jumped into it, we had only initially thought about planning, generating, and revising and monitoring, but we didn't take into account how large of a process pre-writing was to people. So it ended up being great that we had a secondary source.
We can take one more question.
Okay.
This is a topic that's close to my heart because my graduate work was collaborative writing.
Mhm.
So my question for you, and I did a taxonomy of collaborative writing, which then went on, is actually still being referenced.
Mhm.
So my question for you is this for individual writing or collaborative writing as well?
So these are for more the writing process as a whole, as an individual. We do try to include some things that hint towards people that could look into collaborative writing. For example, with forming a community is a large part of pre-writing. Writing with others and editing with others is very important to people and to writers in general. But with the crowd that we were working with, they were more interested in just their own solo work, and then they would bring in small elements of collaborative writing here and there. Yeah.
Okay, with that, I can just, yeah, that's all right. Oh, do you have any questions online? Oh, thanks for, yeah. Actually, I mean, do you want to maybe answer that?
Sure. I didn't see it.
Okay, yeah, for everyone in the room. So basically, Brendan said, did you find any insights about what steps in the process writers were more willing to afford or delegate to AI? Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some context.
Yeah. So there are quite a lot of places where writers would want to delegate to AI. For example, any parts that has to do with organization or recollection could be really useful for writers to kind of delegate out, because although you can start organizing your inspiration and it might spark new ideas, it's kind of a chore to look at through all the material you've collected and try to piece it together, or to put them in specific categories based on your projects. Like when you are all doing your literature review, you don't actually want to sit there and try to look through your entire to-read list and then try to say, this belongs to this category, this belongs to this belongs to this. So that's quite a useful task for AI to be doing instead of you. So most of the things would be within some kind of recollection support or organization support. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll have Jessica. Jessica is a second-year PhD student working in the computational social science lab at U of T. And Jessica, take it away.
So thank you. Yeah, so I'm Jessica. I'm here to present the work that I've done with the CSS lab, which is not DGP, unfortunately, but we would love to be. So the work is called To Rely or Not to Rely. Oh, close that. Okay, I gave him the no. Do you want to go?
Okay.
Yeah, this is easier. Okay.
Great. Yeah, so the gist of this paper is we're looking at different LLM reliance interventions and really taking into account of how that affects people's reliance behaviors, specifically appropriate reliance. So, I change?
Let's focus on the other window, unfortunately.
There you go. Okay, so I'll start with our definition of appropriate reliance, and I will say that this is somewhat of a narrow definition because we're working with tasks that have a ground truth. So there's an element of objectivity to it. Paula, who's presenting next, I believe, is going to do subjective tasks, so that would be an interesting lead up. But in our use case, let's start with like this example of a student who's studying for an LSAT. There's a correct answer for the LSAT, but she's not sure what it is. So she turns to ChatGPT and asks, what do you think the right answer is? ChatGPT says something that's different than what she had originally thought. So there's a different number of like reliance outcomes here. First, positive reliance is, let's say if the LLM's correct and she trusts the advice, that's an example of relying on the LLM positively. And on the other hand, if the LLM's wrong, but she realizes that's wrong, then that's relying on herself positively. So these are correct reliance behaviors. And on the flip side, if we're talking about like wrong reliance behaviors, this will be relying on the LLM when it's wrong or over-reliance, as well as relying on oneself when the LLM's advice is actually helpful or under-reliance. So obviously both under-reliance and over-reliance have issues, and what we want to try to achieve is this appropriate reliance outcome. I'll introduce a couple of metrics that'll come in handy later on for the evaluation. But basically we can measure the ratio of positive reliance on the LLM as well as positive reliance on oneself, which is when the LLM is incorrect. And by taking kind of like a balanced ratio of these two quantities, we get this appropriate reliance ratio, which is very sensitive to both over and under reliance. And by achieving a higher value for ARR, then that's an indication of appropriate reliance. And then I'll kind of talk about like the second half of the study, which is really looking at how the design of the LLM affects user behaviors. So we evaluated 3 different reliance interventions against a baseline LLM, which is just GPT-4o. And the context here, we'll just like keep taking the LSAT question as an example. So the control is just basically giving the recommendation very directly with the answer well indicated. For Reliance disclaimer, it's pretty simple. We just add this like one-liner that warns the user of over-relying on, or I guess like verifying the information before they rely, which is similar to ChatGPT's design, kind of. For uncertainty highlighting, we take the most uncertain generation probabilities of the tokens in the answer and highlight that to indicate that there's some uncertainty to the user. And the implicit answer, basically we prompt the LLM to bypass giving the answer directly. So instead of saying like option A, now it's giving the whole reasoning behind it. So this forces the user to engage more. We then ran a large-scale randomized incentivized pre-registered online experiment with Prolific. So we had about 100 participants per condition doing like a survey study that was about 10 minutes long. And we also collected people's baseline chatbot usage, and it was pretty well distributed. For the task itself, so the participants basically saw like a number of questions. For each question, they answered in 2 stages. The first stage is by themselves, and the second stage is re-answering with the LLM advice. And this 2-stage design was taken to basically capture their decision process of deciding whether to rely on the LLM or not. So the questions were drawn from 2 different task categories. One of them is the LSAT, like multiple choice questions, and the other one is something we came up with, which is image-based numerical estimation, kind of reminiscent of a carnival game where you try to guess how many objects are in this glass jar. And what actually worked really well with these 2 tasks is that they were very accessible, but they were also very difficult. So theoretically, anyone can answer these if you put in a lot of time and effort, but Prolific participants obviously are time rushed, so they were prone to making some mistakes. And then in terms of the advice, we also did artificially sample advice at like equal rates of good and bad. Basically for LSAT, this is either giving the correct option or incorrect option. And then for numerical estimation, this is suggesting values that were either closer to the ground truth or further from the ground truth than the participant's initial guess. And these rates were determined based on a lot of piloting. So there's a lot of text, but for each of the 2 stages, we measure people's answers. We measure their confidence in their answers, and we measure how much time they spent. And stage 2, we also look at if they relied on the LLM advice or not. And based on these quantities, we can compute some high-level metrics. So we can look at the collaborative performance, the confidence calibration, the time of engagement with the LLM advice, and then the aforementioned appropriate reliance metrics. And then we also ran like a very brief subjective perceptions survey. Okay, let's get into the results. So starting with performance, I won't focus on this too much, but basically like what I do want to highlight here is that we can compute a best possible performance based on like the answers that the participant gave and then what the LM said. And you can see here that the best possible theoretical performance is much higher than what the actual LM assisted accuracy is. So this gap here, we can attribute that to wrong reliance. And the same thing in the numerical estimation task, the best possible performance has a much lower rate of error than the LM assisted rate of error. But because like we just sampled the advice artificially, this is not really reflective of real life collaboration. But I do want to, oh, there's one more thing. So something I want to add here is we can also compute how much people relied in the numerical estimation task. So if LMs gave a suggestion of 100, but the user shifted their answer from like 200 to 150, that's like a partial reliance. So we can compute this weight over reliance ratio that indicates how sensitive the reliance threshold can be. And we'll be using this for some future results. But anyways, moving on to the main reliance results. So I want to introduce this graph just so people can get oriented. What happens in this graph is that the y-axis plots the self-reliance, the x-axis plots the LM reliance, and based on those two figures, you can kind of compute the appropriate reliance ratio. But the different regions of the graphs indicates the different types of reliance behaviors. So for the LSAT task, we see that the control is in the over-reliance territory. And with the added interventions, most of the interventions did improve the self-reliance, but only the disclaimer category or disclaimer intervention improved the appropriate reliance. And then this is a little bit more complicated for the numeric estimation, but basically we plotted the results at different weights of ice. From this is like more sensitive, I think, and then this is less sensitive. But basically, most of the interventions only improved the self-reliance or it reduced the LM reliance, but none of them improved the appropriate reliance, which is really interesting. I'll move through the rest of the results pretty quickly, but basically we also find that people tend to get more confident when they're making a wrong reliance decision, which is bad. And then the different interventions also did see different amounts of time of engagement, with disclaimer being the least and the implicit answer being the highest. And then a lot of the interventions did reduce the subjective perceptions slightly. So let's summarize the findings. So the reliance disclaimer was actually the only one that increased appropriate reliance, and it did so in the LSAT test. And it didn't seem to affect the engagement time very much. Uncertainty highlighting actually did decrease all of the subjective perceptions, and it didn't really work as well, like in terms of reliance performance. Implicit answer increased engagement time a lot, and it improved self-reliance, but I think people just took really, really long with it. So I guess like in terms of broader takeaways, what we hope to show here is that improving appropriate reliance is actually much more difficult than reducing over-reliance. So there might be trade-offs in terms of reducing over-reliance or reducing under-reliance that designers have to take depending on the application. And then overall, we do believe that appropriate reliance is a really interesting metric and people should use them more, especially if you're on the technical development of LLMs and you want to do human-centered experiments. And we also acknowledge that like the interventions we evaluated were pretty minimal, and there's like a very big space of LLM designs that should be evaluated for the future. So yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Let's do quick check.
I think it's a great discussion to talk about the cluster and reliance, especially with LLM. I just have one very, I guess, bit more technical question. How do you calculate the highlighting? I forgot the name for it.
Yeah, uncertainty highlighting?
Yeah, uncertainty.
Yeah, so that was just based on the log probability of generation. Where was it? It's a standard method, so we just like took whatever OpenAI recommended. And it's supposed to reflect a proxy of like how likely was this token going to be generated. But there are many ways to implement this, and there are other papers that talk about like more sophisticated ways to implement this in a more like interpretable manner. Because I think the issue we had was that it's just like it's hard to interpret what uncertainties mean, especially if you're like a layperson.
Did any of the prolific likelihood show that one system was much more obstructive objective than the other? Or did they, because you had the Likert rating of preferred, not preferred, or what was the scale?
Yeah, the subjective perceptions were confidence, accuracy, and helpfulness, which are quite limited, but we did try to keep the survey time down. So I think like by adding these barriers, you are, negatively affecting people's perceptions, but I think that could also be a good thing. It just depends on like how you want to calibrate their trust. Yeah, I guess like obstructiveness probably maybe time of engagement would be indicative of that, just based on like how much more time people spend, especially with implicit answer. Yeah, or even highlighting, I think people are just like kind of confused with some of those methods.
Okay, that's thank you. Okay, so we have two more. We're going to be presenting online, and I'm just going to stop sharing. And I don't know, so Paula's next. I don't know if you can share your screen or.
I just requested.
Oh, okay, yeah, sorry. I'm just going to change the permission if I can find that. One sec. Apologies.
No problem. Okay, I can present now.
Okay, yeah,
so
thank you.
bear with me a second while I get things sorted. Okay, you should be seeing my PowerPoint slides.
So
and now you
Paula
should be...
is a graduate student from my school. So at U of T, we have many people doing HCI across many different departments, not just PGP. And she's going to talk about continue the same research question on reliance and subjective reliance. So take it away.
Thank you so much, folks. Can I just confirm if my audio is okay? Can folks hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Amazing. Yes, I think my work will be a very good companion piece to Jessica's. Hello, and thank you for this opportunity to present our work here at Torkai. My name is Paula Oyagi, and I am a first-year PhD student at high school. My supervisor is Professor Anastasia Kuzminiak. This will be my third Kai, but it's my first time presenting as a first-time author for a full paper. It's a shame I can't be there in person. I heard those snacks are really nice, but I'm really thankful for this opportunity. Without further delay, on behalf of my collaborators, I will walk you through our study, A Matter of Perspectives, Contrasting Human and LLM Argumentation in Subjective Decision-Making on Subtle Sexism. This research was conducted at the University of Toronto at the Cookie Group Lab in partnership with Naver AI Lab. So in human AI collaborative decision-making, some scenarios are ground truth-based with objective tasks where one single answer will be the most correct one. Similar to what Jessica just presented, there will be a most correct SAT answer. With these objective tasks, there will be a single most correct one. So for example, tasks like image classification, fraud detection, fact-checking, you can see in these tasks, the AI system should provide the most accurate answer for the human counterpart. However, as AI systems are increasingly supporting humans in more complex decisions, we must also consider open to interpretation scenarios that have no ground truth. And here these tasks are inherently subjective, where contextual interpretation might produce multiple different answers. Think, for example, of more ambiguous tasks such as ethical dilemmas, conflict resolution, relationship advice, AI in social contexts, etc. And for a few years now, our team has been focusing on exploring what collaboration can look like in these more ambiguous tasks. What's interesting about subjective decision-making is the variability in interpretations. And that can depend, for example, on how you will interpret the perspectives of the actors involved in that scenario. That is, which points of view are you considering to make your argument? And that's called perspective taking. So taking that person's perspective, and that is a capability that's been found to help model reasoning. Importantly, remember that there will be no single ground truth against which we can evaluate the AI's performance. Therefore, instead of accuracy as a goal, other aspects become more relevant. For example, perspective plurality, which viewpoints or perspectives are being surfaced in the AI's response. Perspective distribution, so the frequency and the patterns in which these perspectives are being surfaced. And perspective complementarity, does the AI system surface viewpoints that complement human argumentation? With this in mind, our study explored how humans and LLMs differ in the perspectives patterns when assessing open to interpretation scenarios. We chose a case study, subtle sexism. These are not overt situations. So for example, those that have derogatory words or slurs, that's not what we're focusing on. We looked into more nuanced, those are value-based, contextual interpretation is required, and therefore they are subjective. That means that people would probably disagree if something is sexist or not. That is one of the reasons why, for example, it's often challenging to make decisions on subtle sexism for content moderation, where you probably have heard that different annotators, human annotators might disagree in what is or what is not toxic, what is and what is not sexist, depending on the individual's interpretation. So for our data collection, the existing data sets were all of overt sexism. They were the more obvious ones, like I mentioned, no, not for subtle sexism. So we created our own data set. The scenarios data set was collected in online forums like Reddit, Everyday Sexism Project. Then the scenarios were used in question answer prompts, and we asked, is this scenario sexist? Why or why not? And then to be able to compare across different iterations of OpenAI's GPT family, we prompted GPT-3, 3.5, and 4. And then we did the same with an open source model, Llama 3.1. Similar parameters were used for all the models. And then we used the same prompts to gather responses from human participants using SurveyMonkey to be able to compare those responses. So for our data analysis, we opted for a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. We use inductive coding to identify two aspects of the responses. First, the stances and the perspectives. The stances refer to the assessment portion of the response. That is the answer to the question, is this scenario sexist? Our qualitative coding shows that the answers to these scenarios can go beyond the yes or no. So yes, sexist, no, not sexist, but also include more nuanced stances, such as depends, which is one or more conditions could sway the decision, or no stance, when the decision maker deliberately says, I cannot come to a conclusion at this point. Next, we were also looking into the perspectives. So that is the argumentation portion of the response, which is why or why not. And here we found that the victim's perspective was considering if there was any harm caused to a victim, person, or group in that scenario. Then the perpetrator's intention. So what was the intention from this person that's being accused in this scenario? And then the third one here is the decision maker, where we were considering if there was any explicit positionality from the decision maker coming up in that argumentation. Importantly, all these stances and perspectives were found consistently both in LLM and human responses. Our coding applied to both humans and model responses, but they did show up in different distributions, which I will show next. So for key findings here, you will notice, for example, that GPT-3 had low counts for sexist stance compared to the other data sets. They were assessing all the same scenarios, but GPT-3 had the lowest count for sexist. Just a reminder, this is the oldest model in our study. Then you'll see that in the not sexist graph, humans and GPT-3 had similar frequencies, but very different from the other three models. In the lower quadrant here, you can see GPT 3.5 had the highest counts of depends, and GPT-4 had a bit more of no stance. And if we zoom out, human and GPT-3 responses were more definitive in their assessments, because they most often said, yes, sexist, no, not sexist. And the newer models had a bit more of deliberative responses as well when they used conditional reason, saying, for example, oh, it depends, or at this point, I cannot come to a conclusion. So now looking to the perspectives that came into the responses, so which viewpoints were used as part of the argumentation, we found that GPT-3 responses were significantly different to the other data sets, with the decision maker perspective being more prominent. And the responses from the newer models displayed a tendency towards the victim's perspective, as you can see here, with the highest frequency on Llama 3.1, which was the newest model that we had in our data sets. Lastly, for the perpetrator perspective, there was more balance among models and human responses, but still a significant difference between GPT-4 that had the highest count for perpetrator than humans that had the lowest count. We also did qualitative analysis and identified other findings. I'll just demonstrate one here. These are quotes or responses from GPT-3 and 3.5, where they both were displaying the decision maker perspective. You might remember it's when the decision maker is explicitly present in the answer. And notice how both the responses use the pronoun I. So they say, I am a mother, and the other one is saying, I don't have personal opinions. So you'll notice that GPT-3 here is emulating human experience to justify their argument. There's an anthropomorphizing uncanny valley effect there. And GPT 3.5 used the decision maker perspective just to clearly just state limitations. And that is a potential safety guardrail that we found on all the newer models. These I am a mother with 3 daughters only happened on GPT-3. Another interesting aspect of open to interpretation scenarios is that unlike stance, where the responses were mutually exclusive, so you can only say it is sexist or it is not sexist, the perspectives could be combined in a single answer. So one response could take into consideration both the victim and the perpetrator's perspective, for example, or even combine all 3 with a more comprehensive response. So our analysis shows a progressive increase in the average number of perspectives per response from humans at the lowest count, and then in the newer models with Llama 3.1 showing the highest average of perspectives per response. And there was also a dramatic difference in how perspectives are being combined, from rarely happening with human responses at 6% to more frequently in newer models, such as Llama 3.1, where 39% of the responses had combined perspectives, thus indicating a tendency toward more multi-perspective responses in these newer model iterations. And I'll show you now what a perspective combination looks like. The scenario that the models had to respond to was men must pay for women's drinks, etc., on a date. Is that sexist? Yes or no, why? And so the GPT-4 response started with the decision maker perspective stating, as an AI, I don't have personal opinions. And then it went on to say, to consider the victim's perspective, saying this behavior can be perceived as perpetuating traditional gender roles and sexism. And notice here that the victim can be both men and women in this scenario that are being victimized by these traditional gender roles. And then the perpetrator perspective here is where the intentions behind the action are considered. So, from the perpetrator's perspective, this could just be considered a cultural norm or a gesture of civility. All right, now for our takeaways. In human-AI collaboration, when the decision-making scenario is open to interpretation, as I stated at the start, accuracy will not be the only goal for that collaboration, since there will not be a most accurate response that the AI system can provide. Instead, depending on that collaboration goal, the role of the AI system can be to complement the human decision maker. For example, AI could be the adversarial point of view, like a devil's advocate. And based on that, the relevant model performance metrics will become clearer. Our work contributes to the discussion by offering stances and perspectives to evaluate, calibrate model performance according to the collaboration goal, or used to best complement human argumentation. For example, for more adversarial viewpoints, it might be desirable to have more divergent perspectives than the human counterpart. For more comprehensive assessments, more perspective combinations. Same for more decisiveness or more careful deliberation. Calibrating stance, for example, would be helpful. To summarize our contributions to HCI, our study shows that humans and large language models use the same stances and perspectives in response to open to interpretation scenarios, but with different distributions in frequency and combinations. And that the most recent LLMs in our study, GPT 3.5, 4, Llama 3.1, had multiple perspectives in their responses more frequently than in human responses. And these findings suggest that stances and perspectives can be used to inform model design, evaluation, and calibration depending on the collaboration goal. We have a lot more findings in our paper that will fit in this presentation, but we hope to perhaps see you at CHI. Since I wasn't able to be there in person today, I'll be happy to take your questions. Thank you so much.
Apologies for the time. We're just going to take 2 quick questions.
Hello. Thank you for your great talk. I was curious if the content filters that exist on ChatGPT and so on, do you think that had an effect on the results that they gave? You could hear what I said.
Hear the question.
Sorry, I don't think I could hear. Was it content filters?
I think, yeah. Do you mind coming to the front?
All right, I'll come here.
Yeah. I can also change the setting by
that's fine.
Python.
All right, hello. Thank you for the great talk. I was curious if the content filters that exist on ChatGPT and everything like that, do you think that had an effect on the type of questions you asked and the type of results you got?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if you mean content filters as like safety guardrails. We did think it was interesting that like the GPT-3 model had these, I am a mother, I'm a feminist, I have 3 daughters, like very anthropomorphizing examples that were not present at all in the newer models. Like it didn't happen at all. So that is for sure. I think also the imbalance there between the sexist and not sexist that happened in the older models. So we can only say that it's an indication of those safety guardrails in place. But definitely could be also a way to measure that across time, like how are these models changing and how these perspectives are happening. We did find it interesting that the newer models, like Llama was the most recent one, had more perspectives. So it's more like a comprehensive, like on one hand, you can think that it is offensive. On the other hand, some people could think it's not offensive. I don't know. I don't want to make a decision. I want to make a decision. It's up to you. Kind of that more safety guardrail, considering like gender, for example. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
I think I missed something pivotal that everyone else got, which was I got the roles of victim and perpetrator, but I don't understand decision maker.
Yeah, that's excellent. We did code specifically for decision maker when obviously all responses are from a decision maker, so it would code for all of them. Specifically, we wanted to be to code whenever there was an explicit mention. So when they were saying, I think, I am, and they were just putting their first person pronouns, for example, that was very noticeable on the GPT-3 model, for example. And then we noticed that would happen differently in the newer models. And of course, for humans, that would come up a lot, like my personal experience and how they would justify their decisions. So for humans would be something like, in my experience, this happened to me. I felt this for some reason, and then GPT-3 specifically kind of had those. So it was a way for us to identify those personal experiences, opinions coming through as part of the argumentation, not just because it came from them as a decision maker, but that came through as part of the argumentation for why it is or not sexist.
Let's give it to Paula. And last but not least, we have Brendan, who's a postdoc at the same group, Cookie group. And so please take it away. I might need to approve your, oh, great, awesome.
All right, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, unfortunately, when I share screen, oh, there we go. Now I can see everyone. It kind of hit everyone. All right, awesome. So hello, everyone. So I'm going to present our Kai Leping work poster, which is basically on preliminary findings about users' expectations and practices with agent memory. And this work was done in collaboration with my co-authors from the iSchool, from the Cookie group, as well as our collaborator, Young-Ho Kim from Naver. So the motivation behind this work is that, of course, as we all know here, AI agents and chatbots are becoming more prevalent in people's daily lives, in people's work, in their personal activities, so on and so forth. We've seen that with all of the presentations that were given today. And in particular, people are increasingly interacting with AI tools and AI agents over a long period of time for various tasks. And I would argue actually that sort of among the presentations that we saw today, we can kind of see that there's like a bunch of different things that people use AI agents for, like decision making, like for learning activities, like lecture note taking, for writing feedback, brainstorming, health advice, so on and so forth. But the thing is with a lot of these tasks, it could actually be beneficial to work with the AI agent over a longer period of time rather than just thinking of the interaction as a one-off thing. And so this kind of necessitates the need for things like personalization. And in particular, for what we're interested in, for the AI agent to remember things about the user and their previous activities. Yeah, so such tools, they have the potential to work in collaborative complementarity with the user. So in other words, there's a potential for the AI system to understand and remember the right things about the user and their needs. But moreover, there's also potential for the user to understand what is the system's knowledge base, what is it that the system is remembering about the activities, the user, so on and so forth. However, there's a lack of understanding of users' expectations of how AI systems remember, especially while using these systems over a long period of time. And there's a lack of understanding of users' practices of managing these systems' memories. So for example, instructing the system to remember certain things or forget certain things. So this is what we wanted to understand. So our research questions are, what are people's existing mental models and expectations of how AI systems remember, recall, and forget information? What are people's unsatisfied needs with AI memory systems? And what are people's current practices with managing memory in AI systems, particularly AI systems like ChatGPT, Copilot, but we're also kind of interested in non-chatbot tools as well, so things like Grammarly AI. So we did some data collection to understand these to sort of understand this. We conducted interviews with several participants who use personalized AI tools like ChatGPT and Claude, particularly who use long-term memory in these tools on a regular basis. In this late-breaking work, we report on the results of 6 interviews. But keep in mind that we're actually in the midst of interviewing several other participants. And so we hope to report on those results in a future paper as well. So stay tuned. In addition to this, we also collected a series of publicly available Reddit discussions in which people talked about their experiences of using memory in these AI systems. And we thematically coded both the interviews and the Reddit discussions together to understand people's expectations, practices, and pain points with the memory features of these systems. So here's some of what we found. So overall, we found that users often have an incomplete understanding of these systems' memory mechanisms, including what AI agents remember, how the system decides what information to store in its memory, or recall from its memory, and then also how the system's memories influence its behaviors and its outputs. And so as a result of this, participants wanted the system to provide greater transparency of what it remembers about the user and their previous and ongoing interactions with them. So here's an example. So if you've used ChatGPT before, you'll notice that it has a long-term memory feature where you might be in the middle of chatting about it, about some topic, and then you might get a little pop-up that says memory updated. And some people think this is very cool. It could be very useful and handy. But among our participants, many of them didn't really know why it decided to remember certain things and not other things. So in other words, like people kind of expressed a lack of awareness of what the system thinks is important to remember or not to remember. In terms of that memory management feature in ChatGPT, all of our initial 6 participants expressed that they use ChatGPT either by itself or with other AI tools. And so for many of these participants, we actually asked them to open up the Manage Memory menu in ChatGPT to see the list of memories that the system has collected about them over a long period of time. And many of the users were actually surprised at this list of memories. So for example, some of them were actually pretty nervous or scared that it was collecting maybe too much information about them. And then for others, they found Another example would be this participant who said that they found that ChatGPT remembered their student ID and their employee ID and all these personal details. And they were surprised because they don't remember explicitly giving ChatGPT this information. Just that they assumed that it was probably in an email that they asked ChatGPT to give them feedback on. So in other words, this kind of illustrates that there's a mismatch between what the user thinks the system is remembering and what the system is actually remembering from the user's interactions. There's also, in addition to knowing what the system remembers, there's also knowing how the system's memories influence its behaviors and its outputs. So a lot of our participants express that they're unaware of how the system's memories are actually affecting its behaviors. For example, this participant mentioning that they'd like to know which parts of the system's memory go into which responses, and how those memories are influencing its responses. Our preliminary findings also reveal that users don't generally consider all types of memory in the system to be equal. And in fact, their needs for the system to remember certain information evolve over time, depending on the domain, the task, and the stage of the activity that the user is working on with the agent. So for instance, participants described their memory needs as differing across domains. And this is one of the reasons why some participants created separate chats or even separate agents, like for example, custom GPTs for different tasks or different domains. And they often wanted the system's memories to be separated across these domains. But more broadly, we found that participants tended to talk about the AI system's memories as existing along a hierarchy from more high-level general knowledge, sort of on the top, to more lower-level detailed knowledge about specific tasks or specific instances of tasks. So in other words, the further down you go, the more specific the knowledge is related to like one instance of an activity or one specific small time period. But then the further up, the more general the knowledge is. For example, general knowledge or knowledge about the user and their traits. And participants express that they actually organize the system's memories across this hierarchy through different means. If you look at sort of the ways that the participants are managing the system's memories. So for example, participants will create separate chat threads for different tasks. But beyond that, they'll also create chat folders for higher level projects or higher level goals, particularly for LLM chatbots that actually allow people to organize chats into folders. People also express that they'll create separate agents or personas for different domains or roles. In some cases, actually fine-tuning the model to specialize it toward a specific domain or task. In terms of user-related memories, sometimes people will log in with different user accounts. So for example, they might have one account that they share with their partner, and that account is going to have memories related to their partner. But then they might have a separate account that only has memories related to them. And then, of course, to change the model's general knowledge, they might change the base model in use, for example, from GPT to Llama. But we also found that there are some pain points with these existing approaches. So for one, users need to manually pass on memories from one session or agent to another when they're switching tasks or projects or domains. So for example, they need to, if they're starting a new chat session, they need to copy and paste like the system instructions or some of the context that they might have had in a previous chat. Additionally, users don't always want the system to remember or recall certain information over a long term. So for example, participants express that they don't want the system to remember personal or sensitive information unless it's related to that specific task. So very quickly, some design opportunities that this reveals. So the first is that in addition to existing AI systems, memory mechanisms that used time-based or semantic-based retrieval of memories, for example, through vector databases, our preliminary findings suggest that the user's current task or activity may also be an important context cue for determining what information to retrieve from memory and at what level of its abstraction. And then the second is that there's also opportunity for systems to provide explicit mechanisms for the user to organize the system's memories into their own user-defined groups, perhaps through UI mechanisms, and manually set the system's level of access to memories within these user-defined groups. So there's more details in our paper, and I'm happy to chat more about it. Thank you very much.
Great. That's also due to questions, and then Lona can do a closing remark. So anyone who has questions, please come up.
Hello, thank you for your talk. I really enjoy the conversation, and especially the focus on how do we use memory to sort of, people use memory, especially in ChatGPT LLMs, to augment their workflow. But I'm wondering, during your interview process, have you encountered, encountered something or noticed something where people interact with or without memories are, I guess, different, or are they pretty much, using the same workflow just with or without the memory? Because I'm imagining where people like me, I turn the memory off because for some reason I don't really enjoy that feature. So whenever I have something I need LLM to help me to do the task, I'll basically just have a very brief kind of overview of what am I trying to get to. So it gets the context, get the task done. And I'm wondering, does the memory actually help with that, or does the memory sort of complicate the process?
That's a very good question, actually. So indeed, yeah, one of the things that we did note that we have been noticing so far, like both within this preliminary set of interviews, but also among the people who are currently interviewing, is that there are a lot of people who will actually just explicitly turn off memory, or they'll like open a what do you call it, like a temporary chat that sort of puts like the system into a blank slate, so no personalization, no memories, just because, and the reason why is because they don't really want, there's this sort of concern that a lot of participants have that any personalization or memories that the system collects could bias it, could negatively bias it, or in other words, like it could limit the types of responses that the system might give. And this is actually one thing that we saw in our analysis of the Reddit discussions, was that like there was one person who said that they once asked ChatGPT for a recipe on cooking chicken breasts, and then later on they were talking about a completely different task. Like I think they asked ChatGPT later on to write a poem, and then ChatGPT wrote a poem that had chicken breasts in it in some way. So it kind of like negatively limited the responses. And so this is kind of like one of the most, like the most common reason why people will just completely turn off memory, because it's like, because they think it's limiting its behaviors in some way. Whereas people ideally want the memory to improve its behavior, like make it perform better in a certain task, or make it understand the user's personality or communication dynamic or needs better. And so this is actually kind of one of the reasons why people said that they want to separate memories by task or domain, because they kind of want to have this agency over like deciding like, okay, like what is relevant for you to know about me in this moment when I'm doing this task, but when I'm doing this other task, I want you to ignore everything from before and just focus on it as if it's an entirely new thing, and give me unbiased assistance essentially. So we did notice a lot of that essentially.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's do one more question. Oh, sorry. We also have all of the author's contact information, email on the same spreadsheet. So we'll bring that up afterwards, and then you can reach out offline.
Hi, I really enjoyed the presentation, and actually this has been a concern of mine just because it stores the memories, it stores private information. I'm wondering, how does that impact, let's say, I mean, I'm just going far off, but when an agent stores memory, it's collecting information, it's making personas of each account of each person. And that is a very severe privacy concern for me, just as a user. And if I zoom out and I see it on a larger scale, the government or there's so many other agencies which can collect that data. So I do not know what exactly I'm getting at right now because I'm still exploring. But what are your thoughts on this topic regarding privacy and memory?
Good question. So where do I start? I have a lot of thoughts, yeah. So indeed, like a lot of participants were concerned about the privacy perspective. One thought too is like there's also a difference, I guess, between what the system is explicitly remembering. So like what ChatGPT decides to put in that list of memories that it has about you, but then also maybe what it's like implicitly remembering, like, for example, like how does whatever's in the context window influence whether intentionally or unintentionally how the system communicates with you, or what kinds of thing, not just what it knows, but what it can infer about you based on maybe the limited information that it knows about you. And some participants, for example, mentioned that even though like ChatGPT knows like only like a few bullet points about them, mostly related to like a single task, that it's able to somewhat accurately infer like the user's personality or like infer these like deeper things about the user that maybe the user's a little bit concerned about and doesn't really want the system to really know or be able to infer about the user. So indeed, people were concerned a lot about that, which is, again, one of the reasons why people want to have agency in deciding not just turning memory on and off completely, but being able to control, like being able to put memories into different buckets or different groups and be able to turn those groups on and off, or maybe like increase the level of like detailed or abstracted access to those memories at certain time periods. So yeah, so users wanted agency. They're concerned about privacy. Another thing too, a little bit outside of the scope of this work, we focus mainly on instances where there were single users, like just one user using one AI system. But another question is, what if you have an agent or a system that's used by multiple people and it's collecting knowledge or memories about a bunch of people, and then some of that affects its behaviors, and maybe some of its behaviors sort of leak into, or some of those memories leak into its behaviors around other people. Does that become a concern? So yeah, so definitely like privacy concerns were, it was an issue that was raised multiple times by several participants. So yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. This was such a great collection of presentations. Everybody can do one.